Welcome to the Pakistan Policy Brief, where we unpack the policies shaping Pakistan's future. In today's episode, we journey beneath the surface quite literally as we explore the 2013 National Mineral Policy, a cornerstone in Pakistan's efforts to turn its mineral potential into a driver of national prosperity. Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into a really key document here, the National Mineral Policy of 2013, straight from Pakistan's Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Resources. Now, this wasn't drafted in a vacuum, right? It actually built on an earlier policy from 1995.
That's right. But they recognized that, by 2013, the world had really changed. A significant update was needed, particularly to make Pakistan more competitive on the global stage.
Competitive how? What kind of changes?
Well, the source material makes it clear the big drive for this 2013 policy was to align with global shifts, things like legal frameworks, fiscal approaches, environmental standards, basically what international investors were looking for, and frankly, what best practices demanded compared to nearly 2 decades earlier.
Okay, so what was the overall ambition then? What was this policy really trying to achieve for Pakistan's mineral sector?
The vision laid out is pretty ambitious, actually. They wanted to create a strong, vibrant, sustainable, and fundamentally a private sector-driven mining industry. The goal was for it to contribute significantly more to the country's economic development.
Significantly more. How much was it contributing back then?
Well, the policy noted that despite known potential, and we're talking beyond just industrial minerals here, the sector's contribution to GDP was actually less than 1% in 2013.
Wow, less than 1%.
Yeah, so this policy is really intended as a roadmap to fundamentally change that picture.
That really highlights the scale of the challenge they were facing.
Yeah.
The policy identifies several core problems it needed to solve, doesn't it?
Exactly. If you look at the problems the policy explicitly aimed to tackle, there are really 5 big buckets, you could say.
Okay.
First, how to actually increase the economic contribution from mining, and the main way to do that was seen as attracting more private investment.
Makes sense. What's second?
Second, figuring out how to be truly competitive on a global stage.
Yeah.
How do you pull in that international capital, which is very mobile?
Right, it can go anywhere.
Precisely. Third, and this is always crucial in Pakistan's context, ensuring smooth and effective coordination between the federal government and the provinces, given the constitutional setup.
We'll definitely need to unpack that coordination piece. What else?
Fourth, making sure that any mining activity, from just looking for minerals to actually, digging stuff up, is environmentally sustainable, a huge focus globally.
Absolutely. And the fifth?
And finally, actively supporting small-scale mining and making sure local communities and Pakistani businesses can participate and benefit.
Those sound like pretty fundamental hurdles. Let's dig into how the policy proposed to clear them. What were the specific goals it set out?
Well, the policy lists a quite detailed set of objectives, really aiming to cover all angles of transforming the sector. Beyond those broad goals we just mentioned, it specifically wanted to boost revenue for both federal and provincial governments. That's always key. Create that welcoming investment climate that's internationally competitive. Optimize every stage, from exploration to development and exploitation.
Optimize, meaning make it more efficient.
More efficient, more effective, yes. And also promote value addition within Pakistan. So not just exporting raw ore, but processing it there. Growing related industries.
Okay, value addition, important.
Definitely. Then minimize and mitigate any negative environmental impacts. Create jobs and bring socioeconomic benefits to mining areas that includes training, skills development, technology transfer, local infrastructure, the whole package.
Right.
Also, restructuring and building the capacity of the government institutions involved, making geological data widely available and easy to access that's critical for exploration.
Data is huge, yes.
Ensuring safety and security for workers and investors. Handling restoration and resettlement responsibly, establishing pricing and contract mechanisms that meet international standards, and reinforcing that coordination challenge, ensuring effective data sharing between federal and provincial levels. It keeps coming back to that.
That's quite a comprehensive list. It really does try to think through the entire ecosystem. You touched on the constitutional setup being key. That's often where things get complicated in practice, isn't it?
It really is. And understanding that constitutional division is, I'd say, at the heart of implementing this policy effectively. Under Pakistan's constitution, most minerals are a provincial subject.
So what does that mean exactly?
It means the primary responsibility for regulating mining, overseeing detailed exploration and development, and ensuring safety on the ground that rests with the provincial governments.
And the federal government's role?
It's more strategic. Things like national geological mapping, overall policy formulation like this one, and international coordination.
So even though this is a national policy and it says both levels jointly endorse it, the actual day-to-day action is meant to be provincial.
Precisely. The policy emphasizes that. While the Federation provides support and advice, the focus of activities and decisions remains at the provincial level. And this structure is exactly why having clear frameworks for consultation and coordination is absolutely essential for the policy to actually work.
And the policy creates specific bodies to help manage that federal-provincial dance, as you put it.
Yes, it mandates the creation of Mineral Investment Facilitation Authorities, or MIFAs. You're supposed to have a MIFA at the federal level and then MIFAs in each province.
MIFAs, Mineral Investment Facilitation Authorities. Okay, what's their specific role? Facilitation sounds good, but what does it mean?
Think of them as the practical facilitators, the ones meant to grease the wheels. For the areas the federal government controls directly, MIFA-F's composition is detailed, chaired by the Secretary of Petroleum and Natural Resources, reps from finance, planning, environment, industry, academia.
So key players.
Right. Their job is to monitor activity, act as a kind of one window for really large projects to cut through red tape, review compliance, periodically look at the rules and taxes, promote local goods and services, assess processing plans, and help put together investment portfolios for promotion.
And the provincial MIFAs.
Their functions are defined by each province, reflecting that provincial authority. But they can request federal assistance, especially for negotiating complex agreements with major investors.
Okay, so the MIFAs are about streamlining things on the ground, helping specific investments. Is there a higher level body for overall strategy and coordination, keeping everyone aligned?
That's where the Mineral Investment Board, or MIB, comes in. This is positioned as a really top-tier consultative forum.
Consultative forum.
Yeah.
Who's sitting on that board?
This shows how serious they were, at least on paper, about high-level buy-in. It's chaired by the Prime Minister himself.
The Prime Minister. Okay, that does signal importance.
Yeah, absolutely. And the board includes federal ministers, the chief ministers, or governors from all provinces and territories, plus heads of relevant federal organizations like the GSP.
Wow. So what kind of things does the MIB actually focus on? What are its recommendations meant to do?
Their recommendations are meant to guide the sector at a strategic level. Things like encouraging investment flow, helping provinces prepare projects and portfolios for investors and international donors, weighing in on fiscal and tax policies, setting national mapping priorities, also providing financial aid to provinces for manpower and infrastructure development, and crucially, helping resolve disputes where the government's own commitments might be involved. It's designed to meet at least annually to maintain momentum.
Right, keeping that high-level focus. Shifting gears slightly. Data, you mentioned it earlier, it's absolutely fundamental for mineral exploration, isn't it? If investors don't know what's potentially underground, they won't come looking.
Exactly. And this was a major area of focus in the policy because access to reliable, standardized data is just key for attracting serious exploration capital. The Geological Survey of Pakistan, the GSP, is designated as the central body for generating and managing this geodata. The policy calls for strengthening the GSP.
Strengthening how?
By speeding up the publication of existing information, producing standardized geological maps at different scales, specific scales are even mentioned, and importantly, operating an open file system for raw data.
An open file system, what does that look like?
Think of it like a library, but for geology. Explorers can come and look at the core samples, the survey results, the raw findings from past work. The idea is to make historical and new data readily available, not locked away. The policy also mentions fast-tracking integrated surveys to generate more data quickly.
Is the GSP supposed to compete with private exploration companies?
No, the policy is clear on that. It specifically says the GSP should not undertake commercial activity without provincial consent except for its core charter work. It's meant to provide the foundational data, collaborate with provinces, and share data, not compete for exploration rights itself.
Okay. And is there a central hub for all this geological information? A single place to go?
Yes. The policy mandates the establishment of a Geodata Bank Center of Pakistan, the GDCP, at the federal level. And importantly, provinces are meant to have representation in its management and guaranteed access to the data stored there.
So what's the GDCP's purpose, distinct from the GSP?
It's meant to be the central repository. It collects, stores, manages, and disseminates all this geodata in a standardized way. It's tasked with digital map production, offering training, selling data, and publications. And crucially, it's supposed to establish links with other relevant government agencies like the Survey of Pakistan, WIPDA for water data, oil and gas companies like OGDCL and DGPC, and requires mandatory data sharing from them.
Mandatory sharing, that's interesting.
Yes, the point is to consolidate all relevant subsurface information to make it as easy as possible for potential investors to find what they need in one well-managed place.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's move from the institutions collecting the data to the rules themselves. How does the policy aim to make the regulatory environment, attractive and predictable for investors?
The objective here was definitely modernization, building on existing rules like the 1948 Act, but making them better suited for the modern global mining industry. The goals were pretty clear. Ensure mineral titles, basically, the licenses to explore or mine, are granted for periods long enough to actually make exploration viable.
Right, because exploration takes time.
Exactly. Eliminate unnecessary discretion in the approval process, provide clear timeframes for decisions, ensure transparency in how titles are awarded and managed, and update laws to cover modern mining methods, like large open-pit operations which weren't as common before.
And what different types of titles does it actually mention?
It distinguishes between small-scale mining and large-scale mining, which have different processes and requirements. For small-scale, you have things like permits, exploration, or prospecting licenses, and mining permits or leases. For large-scale, there's a more defined sequence. Reconnaissance, first just looking from afar, initial surveys, then exploration, more detailed groundwork, then a mineral deposit retention license.
What's that for?
That's if you find something significant, but maybe market conditions aren't right, or you need more time for feasibility studies before committing to full-scale mining. It lets you hold on to the discovery.
Okay.
And finally, the mining lease, which grants the right to extract.
How are these awarded? Is it first come, first served?
Generally, the principle is first come, first serve for small-scale titles and general prospecting. But for awarding large-scale titles, especially in known mineralized areas, the policy allows for merit-based criteria and even competitive bidding.
Got it. Now, environmental concerns are absolutely huge in mining globally. How does the policy tackle sustainability?
Yeah, this is given significant weight in the document. The policy really emphasizes sustainable development and environmental responsibility throughout the entire mining lifecycle. Companies are required to operate safely and in an environmentally sound manner. This includes mandatory environmental impact assessments, EIAs, before starting any significant work.
Standard practice now, really.
Yes, and also having environmental management systems and plans in place, complying with both national and international standards, carrying out progressive rehabilitation.
Progressive rehabilitation?
Yeah.
Meaning
Cleaning up and restoring parts of the site while mining is still ongoing in other areas, not just leaving it all until the very end.
Okay. That makes sense.
Plus promoting recycling and waste management and encouraging best practices, public disclosure of environmental performance, and corporate social responsibility, or CSR.
And how does the government ensure companies actually follow through on these environmental and other obligations? Is there a stick?
Yes, the policy requires a performance guarantee. This is basically a financial deposit or bond that a company has to put up when a title is granted or renewed. If the company fails to meet its obligations, including environmental ones, the government can draw upon that guarantee to cover the costs.
Okay, so there's a financial incentive to comply. What specific rights do these titles actually grant to the holder?
Well, assuming they're following the rules and paying their dues, a title holder gets the exclusive right to conduct the specific activities, exploration, mining, whatever the title allows within their designated area. This includes the right to enter the land, although they still have to respect the rights of surface owners, of course. And crucially, the right to remove ore or concentrate. The precise rights are detailed in the relevant mining laws and the title documents themselves.
Is it easy for the government to just cancel a title?
The policy aims for stability here. It states that a title can only be terminated for very specific reasons defined in the rules. Things like a serious breach of the conditions or bankruptcy, not just arbitrarily.
Can foreign companies apply for these titles directly?
Yes, foreign companies are explicitly welcome to apply. However, the policy requires them to be incorporated locally in Pakistan before a mineral title is actually granted. So they need a local corporate presence.
Right. Now, for major projects, especially those involving significant foreign investment, these things called mineral agreements seem critical. How does the policy approach those?
Mineral agreements are definitely key tools, particularly for large-scale projects. Provincial governments have the authority to enter into these agreements directly with investors. These agreements lay out specific terms and procedures for the project, often supplementing the standard mining law.
Can the federal government get involved in these provincial agreements?
Interestingly, yes, it can become a signatory, but the policy says this happens only if the province requests it and after the federal government has reviewed the project's viability and the investor's financial standing. It's not automatic.
And the policy mentioned the federal government developing a standard agreement template, a model.
Exactly. The policy calls for the federal government to develop a model mineral agreement. And the purpose behind this is really important for investors. It's designed to provide certainty and comfort, especially to companies and their lenders, by helping to stabilize the legal and fiscal terms, things like taxes, fees, royalties, over the very long life of a typical mining project.
Stabilize, meaning protect against future changes.
That's the idea. The policy states that these agreements are intended to have an overriding effect over subsequent inconsistent laws or rules, essentially locking in the key commercial terms to protect the project's feasibility.
That overriding effect sounds like a big deal for investors worried about political risk or policy changes down the line.
It is. It's a major signal of commitment. The federal government could also guarantee provincial obligations under these agreements if requested, adding another layer of security.
What about when things go wrong? How are disputes supposed to be resolved?
Dispute resolution mechanisms are clearly outlined, recognizing that disagreements can happen in long, complex projects. The first step is always amicable settlement, trying to work it out. But if that fails, particularly for foreign investors, the policy points towards established international arbitration options. It specifically mentions ICSID, the World Bank's Arbitration Center, or ICC arbitration, or other agreed-upon international tribunals.
And for local companies.
For mining companies where the ultimate parent shareholders are majority Pakistani, the policy specifies that arbitration should be conducted in Pakistan under local laws. The policy also acknowledges the need for clear legislation within Pakistan to make sure these foreign arbitration awards can actually be enforced effectively. That's a practical necessity.
Right, an award isn't much good if you can't enforce it. The policy covers some other practicalities too, right? Like joint applications, areas where mining isn't allowed, competitive bidding.
Yes, it gets quite detailed. Mineral titles can be held jointly by multiple parties, with joint and several liability meaning everyone is responsible. Specific areas are explicitly off limits for mineral rights, historical sites, national parks, cemeteries, defense installations. Governments are tasked with clearly identifying and mapping these exclusion zones.
What about radioactive minerals?
Yes. If radioactive minerals are discovered, they automatically belong to the government of Pakistan, regardless of who found them. That's a standard provision in many countries. And for areas where significant mineral reserves are already proven, the policy allows for titles to be awarded not just based on who applied first, but through a transparent competitive bidding process, aiming to get the best deal for the state.
Transparency seems to be a theme. Is there public notification?
Yes, the policy requires public notice for grants, renewals, assignments, surrenders, and revocations of titles in the official gazette, and also recorded in that GDCP database we talked about.
And the data collected by the companies doing the mining. We talked about the GSP's data, but what about company data? Who owns that?
That geodata collected by a mineral title holder as part of their exploration or mining work must be deposited with the relevant licensing authority, the government body that issued the title, and that data then belongs to the authority.
So the government builds up its knowledge base over time?
Exactly. And to ensure that data is comparable and reliable, the policy requires using international reporting standards. It specifically mentions JORC, that's the Australian code, widely used globally for estimating and reporting mineral reserves.
JORC. Oh. And you mentioned a national cadastre.
Yes, a national mineral cadastre system. This is meant to be a modern, digitized system, like a comprehensive map and database that maintains records of all mineral rights, who holds them, their boundaries, the status. It should also maintain a resource inventory using the UNFC standard for classifying resources, and the tenement registry should ideally be accessible online for transparency.
And going back quickly to the environmental side, the restoration part after mining finishes.
Yes. The policy places a clear obligation on title holders to carry out restoration and rehabilitation of the mine site. This includes things like landscaping, aiming to bring the area back as close as possible to its original state, or to a safe and stable condition after mining activities conclude.
Okay, let's move to the financials, the fiscal regime. This is obviously a major factor for attracting any investment, especially the large-scale kind. How does the policy frame the financial aspects? What's the philosophy?
The overall fiscal package, as described in the policy, was designed with the explicit goal of promoting exploration and development. It was meant to be competitive. The specific taxes and levies applicable are detailed in an appendix to the policy, Appendix IPC, and it notes that these are subject to review over time.
Does it specify accounting standards?
It encourages companies to use International Financial Reporting Standards, or IFRS, for their accounting. Again, this aligns with international practices and makes financial statements easier for global investors to understand.
What about royalties? How are those set?
Royalty rates are determined by the respective government, federal or provincial, depending on who has jurisdiction, and they are notified periodically. The policy doesn't fix the rates itself, but sets the framework.
Does the government envision partnering with investors, maybe taking a stake?
Yes, joint ventures between foreign and local investors are actively encouraged. And beyond just collecting taxes and royalties, the government also reserves the right to participate directly in projects. This participation could be negotiated in different ways, maybe taking an equity stake, a participating interest, but they contribute to costs and share profits, or even negotiating an enhanced royalty rate instead of direct participation. It depends on the specific project agreement.
Infrastructure must be a huge challenge in many potential mining areas, which are often remote.
Mhm.
Does the policy address that? How do you get roads and power to these places?
It definitely acknowledges that challenge. The policy recognizes that developing mines requires supporting infrastructure, reliable water, roads, power, and also facilities for workers like housing, medical clinics, maybe schools. Both the federal and provincial governments are tasked with taking measures to facilitate this infrastructure development. This could include direct government investment or exploring options like build, operate, and transfer (BOT) arrangements.
BOT, where private investors might help build infrastructure.
Exactly. Maybe a mining company helps fund a road or power line that also benefits the local community, with an agreement for it to eventually transfer back to government ownership or be shared use.
Okay. And what about building local expertise in technology? R&D and HRD research and human resource development are mentioned.
Yes, those are seen as critical components for the long-term sustainability and benefit of the sector to Pakistan. The policy aims to enhance R&D capacity across the board. That includes economic and legal analysis capacity within government, but also technical R&D, improving everything from survey techniques to mining methods to mineral processing. Upgrading indigenous technology, finding low capital systems suitable for local conditions.
How is R&D supposed to be funded or supported?
The policy suggests ideas like a revolving fund, possibly seeded by a portion of royalties, promoting collaboration between industry, government labs, and universities, protecting intellectual property, and fostering partnerships. It even lists specific R&D thrust areas like rock mechanics, mine safety, and mineral beneficiation or processing.
And on the human resource development side, training people.
The focus there is on creating a skilled workforce for the industry. This involves supporting training programs, maybe through bodies like TVT, Technical Education and Vocational Training Authority, offering scholarships and incentives, retraining existing workers, and crucially, building capacity within government for complex contract negotiations, especially understanding international pricing mechanisms and project costs. Collaboration with universities and technical colleges is key here.
Price determination for the minerals themselves is also highlighted as important.
Yes, the policy states that the respective government needs to establish effective mechanisms for determining the price of minerals produced. This is crucial for calculating royalties correctly and ensuring fair value is received, especially when selling into global markets. It affects competitiveness, too.
And what about giving back directly to the local communities affected by mining operations? You mentioned corporate social responsibility, CSR.
CSR is framed as a mandatory requirement in the policy, not just a suggestion. Mining companies are required to contribute a specific amount annually, the amount determined by the government specifically for social uplift projects in the local areas where they operate.
What kind of projects?
Things like funding or building schools, dispensaries or clinics, water supply projects, upgrading local roads. The idea is the community sees direct benefits. The government collects and manages these funds, but in consultation with the local communities to decide priorities. The contribution is also intended to help fund training for Pakistani employees and government officials involved in overseeing the sector.
Does small-scale mining get any specific attention or preference?
Yes, the policy explicitly gives preference to Pakistani nationals for participating in small-scale mining operations, or as decided by the respective government. It acknowledges its importance for local livelihoods.
And ensuring worker safety. That's often a major concern in mining.
Absolutely. Mine safety is covered under the purview of the provincial inspectorates of mines. These bodies are responsible for setting and enforcing safety and health standards. Companies are required to have a mine safety and health management plan. The inspectorates are also involved in providing safety training, including for handling explosives, and supporting R&D specifically aimed at improving workforce safety and health in the mining environment.
The policy also tries to create linkages, connecting mining to other parts of the economy.
It does. There's an expectation that medium and large-scale mining companies, along with academic institutions, will help provide facilities for technical education and on-the-job training for local people. The policy also promotes using Pakistani goods and services in mining operations wherever they are competitive in terms of price, quality, and availability. And it strongly encourages secondary and tertiary processing of minerals within the country, moving beyond just exporting raw materials to turning them into more valuable intermediate or finished products, building those domestic value chains.
A really critical point for attracting serious foreign investment is always the protection of that investment. How does the policy address that directly? What guarantees are offered?
This is addressed quite explicitly, recognizing its importance. The policy states clearly that foreign private investment in mineral development is protected. It specifically mentions protection against things like compulsory acquisition or nationalization, meaning the government can't just take over assets without proper legal process and fair compensation. It also guarantees the right to repatriate capital and profits, which is crucial for investors to get their money back out.
Are these just policy statements or backed by law?
The policy references specific existing acts of parliament that legally underpin these protections, like the Protection of Economic Reforms Act 1992 and the Foreign Private Investment Promotion and Protection Act 1976. So it's meant to be legally binding protection. Insurance for investments is also encouraged as an additional measure.
Okay, so we have this very detailed policy covering institutions, rules, finances, development. With all these plans and frameworks, how was it actually supposed to be put into effect? What were the implementation steps?
The policy outlined that implementation would require a combination of administrative actions by government departments and necessary legal changes, particularly amending existing laws like the Regulation of Mines and Oil Fields and Mineral Development, Government Control Act of 1948, and its related rules to align them with the new policy direction.
What about companies already operating under the older rules?
They were given the option to transition and choose to operate under the terms of this new 2013 policy if they found it more favorable.
And was there a plan to make sure it didn't just, sit on a shelf? Was there monitoring and review built in?
Yes, the policy strongly emphasized the need for continuous evaluation and review. It wasn't meant to be static. It called for policy review meetings to happen twice a year. These meetings would involve a monitoring committee chaired by the Federal Secretary of Petroleum and Natural Resources, and importantly, include provincial chief secretaries or their nominees.
What was this committee supposed to do?
Its job was to monitor the actual implementation progress, ensure the policy remained aligned with international standards and commitments, help promote the sector domestically and internationally, and crucially, ensure a close working relationship and coordination among all the stakeholders, federal, provincial, industry.
You mentioned an appendix with specific tax details earlier, Appendix Ang. Can you give us a clearer picture of that fiscal landscape the policy described? What were the key taxes and incentives?
Sure. That appendix went into the real nitty-gritty of the applicable taxes and levies. It covered corporate income tax, outlining things like specific deductions allowed for mining development expenditure, for instance, a 25% per year deduction for certain capital costs. It also mentioned the concept of ring fencing.
Ring fencing, what's that?
It generally means that the income and expenses from a specific mining project are treated separately for tax purposes from any other business activities the company might have. So you can't offset mining profits against losses elsewhere or vice versa easily. It keeps the project's economics distinct for tax calculation.
Okay. What else is in the appendix?
It listed various withholding taxes, taxes deducted at source on things like dividends paid out to shareholders, payments made to non-resident contractors, interest paid on approved loans, though some loans might get exemptions, and payments for royalties or technical service fees.
Were there other types of taxes too, beyond income tax?
Yes, it covered general sales tax, GST, which applies to goods and services,
Hmm.
and notably, it introduced a mechanism called the additional profits tax, or APT.
Additional profits tax.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting. Who did that apply to?
This was specifically targeted at large-scale mining companies. The core idea behind the APT is that if a mining project becomes exceptionally profitable beyond a certain defined threshold, the government gets an additional share of those super profits.
How did that mechanism actually work? You mentioned profitability tiers earlier.
Yes, it was structured around the project's after-tax real rate of return, or RRR. Think of RRR as the project's actual percentage return on the investment, calculated after accounting for inflation and standard corporate income tax. The APT, which the policy also refers to as resource rent tax, or RRT in this context, was only triggered after the project's RRR hit specific thresholds.
What were those thresholds?
The policy listed them clearly. If the project's RRR reached 15%, then an RRT of 10% became payable, but only on the profits generated above that 15% RRR level. If the RRR went higher and hit 20%, the RRT rate on the profits between 20% and 25% RRR went up to 15%. And if the project was really successful and achieved an RRR above 25%, the RRT on those highest tier profits was set at 18%.
So it was a progressive tax, a sliding scale. The more profitable the project beyond a certain point, the higher the additional tax rate on that extra profit.
Exactly. It was designed as a profit-sharing mechanism for the most successful projects, allowing the government to capture more revenue from exceptionally rich deposits or high commodity prices without unduly burdening less profitable ventures.
That's a really specific way to handle the upside potential. What other levies were included in that appendix?
The appendix also listed various other standard levies relevant in Pakistan at the time, things like zakat, contributions to the Workers' Profit Participation Fund, WPPF, the Workers' Welfare Fund, WWF, the Workers' Children Education cess, and also contributions required for employees' Social Security and employees' old age benefits, EOBI. Plus, it mentioned an excise duty specifically levied on minerals, with the proceeds earmarked for labor welfare activities in the mining sector.
And finally, did it include any specific incentives for importing necessary equipment? Mining often needs specialized machinery.
Yes, recognizing that challenge, the policy offered significant concessions on imports. For machinery and equipment imported specifically for the exploration phase, it proposed zero customs duty and zero sales tax.
Zero. Okay. And for the actual mining phase?
For machinery needed for mine construction and the extraction phase, the concession was slightly different. A reduced customs duty rate of 5%, still with no sales tax. Plus, it offered an option for deferred payment of that 5% duty over 5 years, although with a 6% annual surcharge on the deferred amount.
So trying to ease the upfront capital burden.
Precisely. And there was also a provision aimed at encouraging local manufacturing lower import duties on the raw materials and components needed by Pakistani companies if they wanted to build mining machinery within the country.
So we've really taken a deep dive into Pakistan's 2013 National Mineral Policy. We've uncovered its ambitious goals trying to transform the mining sector from contributing, less than 1% of GDP into a significant economic engine for the country. We've seen the incredibly detailed framework it proposed, everything from navigating that crucial federal-provincial relationship with bodies like the MIFAs and the high-level MIB.
Right, trying to get that coordination piece, right?
Exactly. To laying out specifics on mineral titles, trying to ensure environmental responsibility was baked in, setting up clear dispute resolution paths, both domestic and international.
Yeah, covering the whole life cycle, really.
And outlining those fiscal incentives, tax breaks, the royalty framework, and that quite sophisticated tiered additional profits tax, all designed to attract that vital private sector investment, both local and foreign.
The policy really aimed to be comprehensive, didn't it? It touched on seemingly everything. From making geological data accessible through the GSP and GDCP, to building human capacity via HRD and R&D, supporting infrastructure development, encouraging value addition within Pakistan, and ensuring local communities see some benefit through mandatory CSR.
It's clear the intention, on paper at least, was to create a globally competitive, transparent, and sustainable environment for mining. And, importantly, providing those explicit legal protections for foreign investment to offer the necessary assurance.
Yeah, the structure is all there in the document.
But, as we always know, having a policy on paper and seeing its full intended impact play out on the ground. Those can be two very different things. This ambitious roadmap was laid out over a decade ago, back in 2013. Thinking about the incredibly complex balancing act, it attempts, bringing in global capital while respecting provincial control, ensuring environmental care while promoting resource extraction, and delivering tangible local benefits. It's a massive undertaking. So here's a provocative question for you and for you listening. What single factor, perhaps something inherently difficult to fully capture or control through policy language alone, do you think poses the greatest ongoing challenge, or maybe the greatest opportunity for realizing the vision set out in this 2013 policy for transforming Pakistan's mineral sector?